Hello, loves. I am going to be real and true and honest with you. There is no gin today. Tonic, Sophie. We have sparkling water, which is the closest I could think to tonic without it actually being tonic, and gin, I'm afraid. Let's just say I had one too many gin and tonics yesterday, and the thought of a water. We can still have a good old chinwag and go over a true crime story today. Today's story is that of Archibald Hall, aka Roy Fontaine, aka Monster Butler. He's a crackpot, this one. So I thought I'd take it back to the 1970s. I reckon it was right banging in the 70s. Yes, I do. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to call him Archibald is a mouthful. Roy Fontaine is the name he gave himself, and I don't want to give him that. Hall. Should I call him Hall? Hall. Or I'm not going to call him the Monster Butler. Shall I? No. Hall. So, no, or Archie's too friendly. Hall. Sophie, go with your first choice. Go with your gut. Hall was born on the 17th of July, 1924 in Glasgow. At just 15, Hall started his life of crime. He began stealing, and then that quickly moved on to burglary. He served his first prison sentence when he was 17 years old. So that's really young. And at around the same time as this, he was then introduced to the world of sex and the high life, if you like, by a more sophisticated, much older, divorced neighbour. Using the money that he'd made from his stealing and his burglaries, Hall moved to London, and he was like obsessed and really enjoyed Hollywood, the movies. It sounds like the neighbour really sparked like this joy and appreciation of the high life and a more sophisticated lifestyle, and obviously like Hollywood and the Hollywood actors and actresses. That's all like that really captured him, and he really liked that. Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca, Joan Fontaine, this all inspired him, and he changed his name to Rob Fontaine. I'm a poet and I didn't know it, although Rob. Okay, Archibald Fontaine would have been more spot on. Hall had a very brief marriage when he moved to London, but he was openly bisexual and he had a string of affairs with men, probably why the marriage ended quickly. So the gay scene in London really embraced Hall, Fontaine. Let's call him Fontaine now because that's what he was known as at this point. So they embraced Fontaine. He had a strong Glaswegian accent. He was charming and suave. And he fit in right nice. So he was really having the time of his life. And this wasn't just any gay crowd. This was like the celebrity gay crowd. So in his memoirs, he noted down some of the people that he'd had sexual relationships with, and they were Lord Boothby and playwright Terence Rattigan. I say that like I know who they are, but I don't. But they were famous. He noted, though, that the love of his life was a man called David Barnard that he met in Hull prison. In the mix of his socialising and his sexual endeavours with celebrities and living it up, all of the like naughty things that he would be doing as well, like the burglary and things like that, they'd all catch up with him. So he would be having the time of his life, but then he'd go into prison for a bit, and then he'd be having a good old time, and then he'd go into prison for a little bit. So he was a bit like all over the place. I couldn't live a life like that. It's too much. So these things all came back to haunt him basically. So he can't have been very good at all of this because he kept on getting caught and going to prison. In one of his longer sentences in prison, Archibald was like, I'm going to teach myself how to get rid of my Glaswegian accent and appear and act like, hoity-toity. So he spent his time creating this sort of persona so that he would fit in with English aristocracy. Why, you ask? We'll get there. So yeah, this is what he decided to do. Sounds like Hall's life was like, it was a bit of play. He liked to sort of like play. He was playing hard when he was out of prison. He didn't really take the things that he was doing very seriously, the theft and the burglary. And he'd go to prison for a while. And while he was there, he might as well learn something. So yeah, in this lengthy one, he decided that he was going to learn how to lessen his accent and become suave. In 1977, he's released from prison and he gets a job as a butler. Hence, getting rid of his accent and trying to become like this. He became a butler for Lady Margaret Hudson at Kirtleton House. And at this time, he had like an on-off relationship with a prostitute, Belfast Mary. Mary Cougal, you heard me, she says, I think that's right. Oh, this is where it gets spicy, because David, do you remember, so the love of Hall's life, they'd been in prison together. So he was his ex-lover and he shows up. Okay, weird. So he shows up and he is employed then by Lady Hudson as a gameskeeper. So again, this isn't as old as other ones that I've covered, but you just pretend to be whoever you want to be. Oh, God. I should try it, shouldn't I? See if I can get a job as something that I'm definitely like not. I wonder if it would work nowadays, but it did then. So both of these chaps, they've just been in prison, being naughty boys, stealing, blah, blah, blah. And now they're like, air, like this. So here we are. And now butler, gamekeeper. Yeah. So naughty David, don't forget, these two are criminals and they steal things and what have you. So naughty old David, he steals some silver from Lady Hudson. And it's a bit of a shame because actually, although Hall went into this with it in mind that he was going to fleece Lady Hudson, he actually liked her and he actually enjoyed his job as a butler. So it seems like he was just kind of going to like carry on. Maybe all of these things would have caught up with him eventually. However, he was enjoying himself. Then David comes along. David steals the silver. Hall has a word. That mate, no, I like her. Don't nick her stuff. And David doesn't like this. And he's like, do you know what, mate? I will tell her who you really are if you tell on me about stealing the silver. So that didn't go down well, no. So up until this point, Hall has just been a thief. And sadly, this all changes. So with the threat of David exposing him to Lady Hudson and telling her about his criminal past, he takes David out on a rabbit hunt. You can see where I'm going with this, can't you? Oh, a Dorito. On said rabbit hunt, Hall takes his gun and he shoots David in the back of the head. He then buries his body near the lake. And there we are. No more risk of being outed by David. Dear me. Sadly, Hall now has a taste for blood. He gives up completely on trying to live an honest life and moves back to London. Such a shame. This is where he finds a job as a butler for a wealthy ex-Labour MP and antiques collector, Walter Scott Elliot. The names in this one are fantastic, aren't they? Makes me feel like I should be sitting here with a cup of tea and a saucer. So British. Naughty old Hall. He was going to extort Walter Scott Elliot and his wife Dorothy for all they had. And he asked Michael Keto, a small-time crook, for a hand. While he was showing Kitto, I might be saying that wrong. I think Kitto actually. Kitto. Kitto, strange last name. While he was showing Kitto around the house, like saying, oh, we'll have this, we'll have that, and talking about what they were going to do and how they were going to like steal all of this stuff from them. Poor Mrs. Smith Elliot comes home and she hears them. They then spot her, and Kitto, this is when he is very naughty, puts a pillow over her face and smothers her. That's so bad, isn't it? So just such bad timing. She came home at that time and overheard what they were about to do. So yeah, so she was then smothered. They then had to drug Walter. So they used like whiskey and sleeping pills and sort of like sedated him, if you like, and then put the body in the boot of Mrs. Scott Elliot and put him in the car, and they drove him to Scotland. They buried Mrs. Scott Elliot by the side of a quiet road, and then while he was still sedated, they beat Mr. Scott Elliot over the head with a shovel and then buried him too. So that was unpleasant. Mary Kugel, again, I think I'm saying that correctly, she came along for the ride. She worked in their house also. The next day, the three of them had a row because Mary Kugel, she really wanted to keep a fur coat of Mrs. Scott Elliot's. Now, Mary Kugel, she was a prostitute previously, and it looks like Hall got her the job with the Scott Elliots. So, but she was poor. She was still poor. So it would have been lovely for her, the thought of her being able to keep some of these lovely garments of Mrs. Scott Elliott's. Silly Moo. And the guys were just like, no, we don't need any evidence connecting us to, you know, what's happened, what's gone on. No, no, no. And instead of resolving that with their words, they bonked her on the head. It's not funny. They bonked her on the head with a poker, an iron-like poker thing, and then suffocated her. So this just seems to be the way that Hall deals with anything that comes in his path. Just kill them and bury them and move on. He's a terrible person. Now, after this, they decide to head to Hall's Fontaine. Sorry, I think I've used all of the names that I said. I was going to just use one. They headed to Hall's family home in Cumbria. Now, when they arrive, his brother, Donald, is there. He's been released from prison 3 days previous. And Donald is a paedophile. And Hall does not like him at all. And at this point now, Hall is just, it's like, he's just so used to like, just disposing of people that aren't like really benefiting him anymore or that get in his way. So he just doesn't like it. He just doesn't like Donald. And he's like, nah. So Donald is very interested in what Hall's been getting up to. And keto is when you just eat bacon and sausages, isn't it? Yummy. Donald's like, what have you been doing? How does this all work? You know, knows that they've been like thieving and stealing from rich elite people. And he's interested. So Hall's like, oh yeah, tell you what, we're going to do another heist soon, but it involves tying somebody up and we need to practice. So would you let us practice on you, Donald, love? So Donald agrees to be tied up. And unfortunately, when he is tied up and incapacitated, they use chloroform on when they do that and people like that, they use chloroform to knock him out and then they drown him in a bath. I say they, I think it was Hall. It was Hall. He was like, I've killed all these other guys that are just like a bit annoying to my life. So I really don't like him. get him gone too. So again, Kitto and Hall find themselves going up north to bury another body. Oh dear, boys. They ultimately were caught for just being a bit stupid. So they went to Newcastle to an antiques dealer to get rid of lots of valuable things, but for a fraction of what they were worth, which is so stupid, isn't it? So the antiques dealer in Newcastle, he just finds it very suspicious. He's like, okay, like that is odd. And he notes down the number plate of the car and informs the police. Now, the police discover that the car was rented to Mr. Scott Elliott. So they went to pay him a visit at his Chelsea home. And when they were there, they found blood spattered all over the place and lots of valuables missing. A month previous to this, Mary's body is found in a river by a shepherd. And the detectives know that Mary worked for the Scott Elliots as a housekeeper and cook. They did a little bit of digging and they discovered that Mary had stayed in a hotel with 3 other men, so an elderly man, Mr. Elliot Smith, Mr. Scott Elliott. The hotel owner noted that only the 2 younger men returned. Suspicious. In 1978, they go to stay in a hotel, Hall and Kitto, and the hotel owner becomes suspicious and he calls the police, and the police search and they find Donald Hall's body. So they were on their way to go and bury that, and they arrest them. Hall managed to escape out of a toilet window. He didn't get very far though. On the 18th of January, Hall tried to commit suicide, and then after that he decided that he would help the police to find Mr. Scott Elliott's body on the Highlands. As the days went on, they then found Mrs. Scott Elliott's body, David Wright from the beginning, and Hall had just confessed to everything. He confessed in court, he confessed at his trial, and he was convicted and given a whole life sentence. He tried to commit suicide a number of times. He wrote an autobiography as well. He called it A Perfect Gentleman. He said, quote, "There's a side of me, when aroused, that is cold and completely heartless." It's a funny case, really, because right at the beginning, it's like reading a book, this one. It's like at the beginning, there was this sort of glimmer of hope and chance that he might change his ways. And I think when he got the job for Mrs. Hudson, Lady Hudson, he was enjoying it and he was loving his life there for a while. Yeah. And who knows what would have happened, because maybe his ways would have just all come out anyway, eventually. But it sounds like, it felt like he had this sort of real chance to turn everything about and start, and like he felt comfortable and at home there and was enjoying it. Yeah. So, it feels a bit sad. Like when I read that then David pops up and David's naughty and steals the silver, it's like, no, like, oh, why did you have to come and ruin it? Sort of thing. Although we all make our own choices. He didn't, And you could almost argue that when he killed David, he was like, I have to do this so that I can have this chance at this life. But it's almost like when he made that choice and when he committed that first murder, it sparked like that side of him to sort of come alive a bit. So it didn't actually give him the chance to live an honest and maybe happier life. It gave him, it set him off on a different path. Oh dear. So no gin to recommend for you, unfortunately, today. I'm so sorry. I can, however, recommend Tesco's sparkling water. It's delish. Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Sin and Tonic. It would be awesome and lovely if you could join me next week for another true crime story and a glass of gin. Beep, 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 beep.